I'm really excited to dig back into Ezra. We took 1 week off last week as we talked about Reformation. But as I dug through Ezra 4 and 5, I had to look up how to spell a word that you don't normally look up on Google or DuckDuckGo or whatever you use. I had to look up how to spell Neener. I don't know how long it's been since you've heard that little phrase, but I can remember hearing it on the playground, Neener. And other things like it. You see, insults start off almost as unintelligible non-words, and yet we get that we're being mocked, right? It happens to many people. And unfortunately, it doesn't go away as we get older. Things change, but the challenges that face us socially and that peer pressure, we would hear it called, they exist and they happen and they continue. And so when you're little, you might hear Neener, and then you might get name called, but then eventually you might get told, stop being so intolerant, stop being a bigot, stop being unfun. It might be, just come along or just go along to get along. But either way, there is this social pressure. And in Ezra 4 and 5, this social pressure is going to begin. So let's just quickly remind you of where we are in the books of the Bible. We're in the Old Testament again, and we're kind of at the end of, the time of the Babylonian exile is over. And so Israel has come together. They have been commissioned to build the temple that Herod the Great will later revitalize and be there in the time of Jesus. But we are about in the 539 through 529 era as we go into this next chapter. The temple is being built, but it is not finished. And that H and Z you see up there, that's Haggai and Zechariah. We're going to talk about those two a little bit at the end of today. But we see that there's been a very important call on the Jewish people. They were punished. They were sent away. They were in exile. And then this is the second Exodus, it's called. They've been returned to the land. We've learned important lessons like there's a role for everybody, right? They were getting priests younger and younger, Levites younger and younger, because there was a lot to do. And so they were working together, and we can do more together. And we have also learned that it was important to rest. The land rested for those 70 years. But now it's time to work. And we have a similar problem today. Thanks to our cell phones, if nothing else, it's very easy to always be connected to work when we're not at work. And when we're at work, it's also easy to be connected to play thanks to all those nice fun games. It's not even just solitaire anymore that we can have access to. It's so many things. And social media, of course, distracts us as well. So we often live in between the two worlds instead of being on the task that we're supposed to be on at the moment. Now, speaking of rest, I have a little disclaimer before we get into Ezra chapter 4. You'll notice that the slides are a little different this week, and they're not NASB 95 that I typically use. Well, this is the third week in a row something crazy was happening on Saturday, and since the past two, I was up until 1 or 2 in the morning at the church building, Sheila decided that she was going to try to make slides for me to save me time. And so she did, and they turned out really nice. And we actually found out that next week, we'll be able to use the NASB 95 again. So this week, you'll see a few phrases that are a little different. Most of this is ASV, so it chooses to translate some things a little differently than I actually prefer. So it'll say Jehovah of hosts instead of Lord of hosts, then it'll say Jehovah instead of Yahweh and some things like that. But give it some grace as we go through, and maybe even a little bit of understanding about how translations work, and that there's still truth contained in them, even if the English grammar looks a little different from one to the other, because it's a translation of a different language. So with that caveat in mind, let's go ahead and let's dig in. Ezra chapter 4, starting in verse 1. Now, when the adversaries of Judah and Benjamin heard the children of the captivity were building a temple unto Jehovah, or Yahweh, the God of Israel, then they drew near to Zerubbabel and to the heads of fathers' houses and said unto them, Let us build with you, for we seek your God as you do, and we sacrifice unto him, since the days of Esarhaddon, king of Assyria, who brought us up hither. But Zerubbabel and Joshua, or Yeshua, and the rest of the heads of the fathers' houses of Israel said unto them, You have nothing to do with us in building a house unto our God, but we ourselves together will build unto Jehovah, the God of Israel, as King Cyrus, the king of Persia, hath commanded us. So a little bit, let's do a brief aside on language. We anglicize this, what's called the tetragram, YHWH, Yahweh, into Jehovah back in the old days. The Hebrews did not have that J word or letter and sound. And so even Joshua that we see is Yeshua. Even Jesus was Yeshua. And this is actually the same name. This priest here has the same name that Jesus would later have. And so we're used to hearing those terms, but I do like trying to be more accurate generally. But that's what's going on there. But more importantly, in the context of what's beyond those words, we see the people of the land, whom we would later know as Samaritans, come up, and they're going to try to get in on what's going on. The Jewish people that have remained pure and not intermarried with other people have come, and they've come back, and they're rebuilding the temple, and they're going to worship Yahweh, the one true God. These people said, well, we were moved here, and we've been worshiping your God. But the question is, have they? You know, I mentioned in my newsletter article, if you guys have not read it, please do. We've said goodbye to a lot of people. One of the, I think, impactful phrases that Charles Douglas had told his kids was, just because they said it out loud does not mean it's true. And that's a really impactful phrase to remember. Just because they said that they've been worshiping Yahweh doesn't mean that they really have. In fact, we know that the Samaritans would have a blended or syncretic religion where they would mix different elements of different religions together. And so they could say, hey, we've been worshiping Yahweh, but really they actually brought a lot of their pagan practices with them. And yeah, there have some ancestry, somewhat connections to the Jewish people because they had been intermixed, but they weren't pure, and more importantly, their customs were not pure. And so it wasn't like Ruth the Moabitess, who maybe came from somewhere else and then vowed to be faithful to the one true God. They might have said it with their lips, but they weren't. Now, I've also mentioned throughout Ezra that I'm a fan of Timothy Mackey's The Bible Project. And they're just short little videos that you can watch on YouTube, and you can enjoy them with your kids. And I really like that you could intro each book of the Bible with them. But this particular one, I think he got really wrong. And it really bugged me because I normally like him. And so I don't know if you guys have ever heard a teacher or a preacher, or maybe even you're reading a book, even one that you like, and then you hear them or you read something and you suddenly go, flag on the field, right? Something is not right. Let's wait, let's pause, let's review the tape, let's investigate. These moments are actually really important. These are often the moments where you can have a really good learning experience. And if what they're saying is true, and you're being a good Berean, and you dig in and confirm it's true, it might help you understand Scripture. We often listen to things passively. Our TVs, our phones, they teach us to do this, just to be entertained, just to absorb. But Scripture tells us to take each thought captive for Christ. And like we talked about last week, we need to be Bereans. That doesn't mean all opinions or all evaluations of ideas are true, but no one person is the arbiter of all those truths, right? No one gets to say, well, this is the truth, at least no human person, right? No just priest or whatever. No, we all get to dig in and try to figure it out and pursue depth in that truth. We want to figure out what's true, not as our culture does, claim our truth. I don't want that stuff, right? Your truth could be that you don't have, gravity isn't real for you. You jump off a building, find out how quickly that works, right? We want to discover the real truth. And as we do that, sometimes we're going to run into teachers who we really like, and they're going to get something wrong. And if we don't catch it, we might believe in error. And Timothy Mackey here, he gets this one wrong. He paints them as failing here. He paints Zerubbabel and later Ezra and Nehemiah as failing to incorporate natural descendants of Israel. But they're not just natural descendants of Israel. Sure, they got some blood in there, but that is not who they are. And we're going to see they're going to continually identify with the lands that they came from. And so this was about purity. They did not want to repeat the mistakes of the people before the exile. They didn't want to go, let's mix things together and go along to get along, and then discover that, oh no, we've been corrupted from within. See, what Zerubbabel was doing here was not being a jerk to these people. He was protecting his family and keeping them pure. He didn't want them to have bad ideas. He wanted them to know, hey, wait a minute. We don't do the things that the world does. We don't worship like that. We don't believe like that. They're going to do their thing, but we're going to worship God His way. And this is important for us today as well. Paul says it this way in 2 Corinthians 6:14. Do not be bound together with unbelievers. For what partnership have righteousness and lawlessness? Or what fellowship has light with darkness? Now, when the rubber hits the road and you go to start applying this in your business practices and your relationships and marriage and friendships and all that, you know what? There's not this really exhaustive checklist for you to know when this applies and when not, and when it doesn't apply. Because yes, Jesus did hang out and have dinner with sinners. Of course, He did so not so that their sin would rub off on him, but as a missionary to change their lives and to bless others. And so how do we do this? Well, here's one specific example and some lessons that I've learned from it. I had two mentors who approached a problem very differently. While I was in Kentucky, the senior pastor there that I got to serve as first youth leader and then assistant pastor, he had someone come to them while they were in the middle of a building project, all right? They were actually not building. They were actually going to buy a building. And so they came and had somebody say, I've been playing the lottery and I want a whole bunch of money and I want to give you this sum of money. And the pastor said, no. And some of you are going, wait a minute. A little church needing a building. It was growing at the time. What were you doing? We didn't have enough room inside of our building to fit everybody inside. What are we going to do? Well, he said no because his reasoning was, you were sinning in playing the lottery. That's gambling. It's an unwise use of your money. Why on earth were you doing that? And so what it worked out for you this time, if I affirm you now, you're just going to continue to do it. And so I don't want the devil's money building God's house or helping us to buy God's house. And so he said no. Now, later on, I was with a different mentor in Alaska, and I told him about the situation. And we were just kind of talking things through. He actually worked part-time because he was retired at a place that I worked full-time. And so sometimes we get paired, and on a grave shift, I could just pick his brain and spend hours with this senior pastor, minister, and church planner, and I just learn as much as I could from him. I wanted to use every minute that I could. And I talked about this particular incident, and he said, oh, I'd have done it. I would have done it in a heartbeat. I would have taken his money and I would have totally bought that new church. It would have been an amazing thing. And I don't remember if he told me this story then, but there's a story that kind of relates to this idea that is connected. And it's the story about a faithful Christian man who got laid off because of hard economic times. And he had an atheist neighbor who had always witnessed to. And this atheist neighbor saw that he would get out in his car and he would pray and he would go off and he would try to do job interviews and things like that, trying to find a new job. And he had decided that this Christian was only believing in God because God had been meeting his needs. And so he was tired of all that. He thought he could be good without God. And so he decided he was going to give this Christian who was now without a job, he was going to give him a bunch of groceries to show that he didn't need God to provide for him. And maybe that would free this Christian of his, dependence on God. Well, the Christian prayed in his car, and he was asking, God, please provide for my family. Please provide me a job. I know that you are good and in charge, even when I don't feel like it. And I know you have a plan right now. And so he takes off. Well, the atheist sneaks groceries in. Guy comes back from a job interview. He pulls out of his car, and he looks, and he sees a big pile of those old brown paper bags. I don't even know if they do that in California, but that was really part of the original joke here. And they have those, and they're full of groceries. Not just any groceries, good groceries. He didn't just get, the bare minimum. It wasn't just bologna. There was steak in there. And he was excited. Oh, Lord, you have blessed me. And the atheist kind of jumps out of the bushes. Oh, no, it was me. I bought these groceries for you. And the man just kept praying and said, oh, God, you've blessed me with these groceries. And not only have you blessed me, but you made the devil pay for it. And so, obviously there's some humor there, right? The atheist is all upset. But really, sometimes God does use people who are not following him in a way that can bless others. And so that mentor, he made that a point. Like, you don't have to affirm how they got it, but you could accept this offering and you could teach them from that point forward. And it might actually be a relationship break to just turn them away like that. It could be turning down money God was sending him. And so, I don't know. I think my second mentor was right. But when the rubber hits the road and you have to question, well, is this friendship with these unbelievers, is it hurting me more than it's helping me? Or is this business relationship, or is this deal, is this job, is this hurting me more than helping me? You're going to have to be active. Just like we take every thought captive for Christ, we're going to have to think through our decisions and think about how it impacts our spirituality and our spiritual walk in life. And we may not always come to the same conclusions. There is not an easy answer all the time, but we do need to be thinking about it, how we do it. All right, so let's dig back into Ezra. He's protected his people by saying, no, you can't be a part, and they're going to respond by being angry and jealous because for 70 years, it had kind of been their land, and they didn't want these people coming in and taking it back. Then the people of the land weakened the hands of the people of Judah and troubled them in building, and hired counselors against them to frustrate their purpose all the days of Cyrus, king of Persia, even until the reign of Darius, king of Persia, and in the reign of Ahasuerus, in the beginning of his reign, wrote they an accusation against the inhabitants of Judah and Jerusalem. So, it's been recorded in the Bible, there's nothing new under the sun, and boy, is that true. This is the same pattern that we see play out plenty of times. First, they tried to pressure them. Hey, let's compromise. Or then it became let's go further. Let's pressure and hinder them. Let's make fun of them. Then it's let's hire counselors. Let's be strategic and then influence them that way. And then when that didn't work, might makes right. Let's make the government shut them up and stop them. We see the same thing play out today, right? First it was, kind of a social movement in the free love movement or the sexual revolution, they called it, right? And so it was a move and a break from traditional Christian sexual ethics. Then it became a thing where it was on TV a lot and we just absorbed it in. Lots of people's views are informed not by what they actually read or study, but what they passively absorb in entertainment. Right? Even our own current president said that his views on gay marriage were informed more by will and grace than anything else, and he's supposedly a Roman Catholic. And that show's like 2 decades old or something like that. So that's an idea. And by the way, Christian sexual ethics are far more radical than they get credit for. The country pushes back on certain areas, but really it's radical in that it's one man, one woman, one lifetime. That's pretty radical, and sex belongs only in marriage. But we see that there's been this push. And then from there, when it was on TV and that wasn't working, everybody wasn't getting on board, then there was firms that would help people market things and help businesses market things and help make sure that they were being tolerant enough and things like that. And even beyond that, then it went to government legislation. And there was even a man named Saul Alinsky, not on that particular topic, but in terms of socialism, who wrote a book called Rule Book for Radicals, and he would encourage people, young people that believe like him, to get in the education system so that they could influence young people to believe what they believed. So they were intentionally influencing young people. Now, Christians do this too, right? Like C.S. Lewis wrote Narnia. I read Narnia to my kids so they can learn truth in a way that is entertaining for them, and it can be a launching point for further discussions. But for every Narnia, there's also the Golden Compass, which was written intentionally to be the atheist Narnia. And we see this inside of so-called liberal churches or non-biblical churches or whatever we want to call them. Matthew Vines is somebody who actually started a new Reformation project, and he goes around and he has conferences and he trains Christians to go back into other churches, local churches, and to change their mind about what the Bible says about sex. And that's crazy. That goes on today. And so ultimately we see the same pattern. This might makes right is the ultimate end if you don't go along with the flow. But there's pressure the whole time. We're always going to experience pressure in the world, right? The original Exodus, there was Balaam, right? And he was trying to convince them to sway things away. And he would tell them, hey, use pleasure. And that's very often what people do. Oh, well, excuse this sin so we can we'll excuse your sin if you excuse this sin, rather than calling things what they are. Now, you also might have noticed this name, Ahasuerus. We better know it as Xerxes. That's this guy. You probably also know him from Esther. Now, I know the movie 300 depict him with all kinds of nose rings and all that kind of stuff. I don't know much about the Persian Empire's fashion. Romy will also affirm that I don't know much about fashion today. So if you want to have a fun conversation, ask her about that. But I certainly don't know about fashion back then. But he's the same king from the book of Esther. And the most important lesson from that book, of course, is when her cousin says to Esther, maybe you were born for such a time as this. Now, that wasn't focused on the Jewish people rebuilding Jerusalem. No, that was focused on people across the empire. And it's great to know that even though I called them Babylonian couch potatoes a couple of weeks ago, God was still caring for them and still moving among them. There's not a lot of historical information on Esther outside of the book of Esther. What we do know is that about 15 to 20 years after the incident happened where the kind of law was rewritten and they were allowed to defend themselves and things like that, the Jewish people were saved, that they were celebrating Purim. But we only have his first wife, Xerxes' first wife, mentioned in other writings. So we don't know how impactful she was. And in fact, it seems that even after that moment, she probably wasn't close with the king, because we're going to see the sons of him and the descendants do some different things and not have great relationships with the Jews. But what we do know is that after Darius dies in 486 BC, Egypt rebelled, and Xerxes had to go, and he marched west, and he had to deal with Egypt. And so we're going to see that the people of the land are saying, oh, look, you're dealing with Egypt. Well, here's your next rebellion over here. Better squash it before it starts. And that's kind of what they're doing. They're trying to compare these other troublemakers with Israel, with Jerusalem. And they want the government to intervene. And in the days of Artaxerxes wrote Bishlam, Merodach, Tebal, and the rest of his companions unto Artaxerxes, king of Persia. And the writing of the letter was written in the Syrian character and set forth in the Syrian tongue. Rehum the chancellor and Shimshi the scribe wrote a letter against Jerusalem to Artaxerxes the king in this sort. Then wrote Rehum the chancellor and Shimshi the scribe and the rest of their companions. These are the native tribes from which they came and were put in there. I'm not going to try to pronounce all of them, but the Babylonians are a name that you'll recognize. And the rest of the nations whom the great and noble Osnapper brought over and set in the city of Samaria, and then the rest of the country beyond the river Jordan, and so forth. This is the copy of the letter they sent unto Artaxerxes the king. The servants, the men beyond the river, and so forth, be it known unto the king that the Jews that came up from thee are come to us unto Jerusalem. They are rebuilding the rebellious and the bad city, and have finished the walls and repaired the foundations. Be it known unto the king that if this city be builded and the walls finished, they will not pay tribute, custom, or toll, and in the end it will be hurtful unto the kings. Now, because we eat the salt of the palace, that is used sometimes as like a money kind of thing, salt was so valuable, and it is not meet for us to see the king's dishonor, therefore we have sent and certified the king, that search may be made in the book of the records of thy fathers. So shalt thou find in the book of the records, and know that this city is a rebellious city, and hurtful unto kings and provinces, and that they have moved sedition within the same of old time, for which cause was this city laid to waste. We certify the king that if the city be builded and the walls finished, by this means thou shalt have no portion beyond the river. And so I should point out that kind of like Herod in the New Testament, there's Herod the Great, there's Herod Antipas, there's Herodias, there's other Herods. And the New Testament expects the original readers to understand who those are. And us today, we don't understand who those are. There are multiple Artaxerxes and there are multiple Dariuses. And so one of two things is happening here. Ezra is writing this down later, and it is possible that he is grouping these different letters that are sent topically, which is pretty common for the era. We didn't write things in chronological order until much later. In fact, Luke is your chronological ordered gospel. The rest are not chronologically ordered because they're ordered topically. That was kind of normal. You didn't waste a whole bunch of paper putting them in topical order or in chronological order. You just kind of wrote almost stream of consciousness as the topic came to mind. Or he's calling somebody king before they're actually king and they're just involved in the process, like they're around. But either way, this is a grouping of different letters to show that they're reaching out and trying to get the government to stop them. And you'll note, when they can't attack them for what they're doing now, because they're paying their taxes, they're being good, right? There is already an idea of a Messiah who deliver them in the future. But right now, they're happy not having their own king. When they can't attack you for what you're doing now, people that are your enemy will attack you for what you've done in your past. Right? We see this in cancel culture, right? And those of you that follow anything entertainment-wise or Twitter, Facebook, whatever, you'll see that sometimes celebrities will have a tweet dug up from 10 years ago, and they'll get canceled for it. And what's really fascinating is that the way our society progresses, which, by the way, we should always ask, what is our society progressing to anyways? Like, what's the outcome? What's the end goal here? But as they do this, sometimes the thing that they're pointing to 10 years ago, which is not okay today, they would have laughed at 10 years ago and was perfectly fine then. There's a big difference in shifting morality of this world versus a true concrete morality of God that stays the same, right? Their moral views will shift and change, and that will always make you constantly having to question what's okay now. Whereas if you do the real morality, if you truly follow God and please Him, then you can be confident that that is the real deal and it's not shifting like man. But this will happen, and they'll pull it up to attack you with it. And they'll do it to you too. And unfortunately, the internet is around forever, even if you delete a whole bunch of stuff, which I did. By the way, I'll admit that before I even applied at this church, or around the time I did, when I was first finding you guys, about 4 years ago now, that another church I had applied to, they questioned this Facebook post that was a joke. I had shared something like 8 years ago or something when I was first on Facebook, and they're like, oh no, this joke mentions beer. You can't have this joke on your face. Oh, like, oh gosh. So I just went back and I deleted a bunch of stuff, like things like that, because people will do that. We need to be aware of that. We can't change our past, but we can be careful with what we say now. And maybe we can also be gracious with people who have made mistakes in their past. So let's keep reading. Then sent the king an answer unto Rehum the chancellor, and to Shimshi the scribe, and to the rest of their companions that dwell in Samaria, and in the rest of the country beyond the river, peace, and so forth. The letter which he sent unto us hath been plainly read before me. The king himself probably couldn't read, so they read it to him. And decreed and search has been made, and it is found that this city of old time hath made insurrection against kings, and that rebellion and sedition had been made therein. There have been mighty kings over Jerusalem who have ruled over all the country beyond the river, and tribute and custom and toll was paid unto them. Make you now a decree to cause these men to cease, and that this city be not builded until a decree shall be made by me. And take heed that you not slack herein. Why should damage grow to the hurt of the kings? Then when the copy of King Artaxerxes' letter was read before Rehum and Shimshi the scribe and their companions, they went in haste to Jerusalem unto the Jews, and made them to cease by force and power. Then ceased the work of the house of God which is at Jerusalem, and it ceased until the 2nd year of the reign of Darius, the king of Persia. Now this Darius would be the second Darius in view here. So what we see is that people, pardon me, I skipped ahead, I'll just leave it. The people, they're using force to make them to stop building, and so they've got it. There is a history of sedition, but they're not doing anything now. And we're going to see later on, I'll spoil this for you, that they're going to look up King Cyrus's decree. But let's go one verse ahead into chapter 5 to get a little perspective of how God is going to choose to respond to this. Now the prophets Haggai, the prophet, and Zechariah, the son of Iddo, prophesied unto the Jews that were in Judah and Jerusalem. In the name of the God of Israel, they prophesied unto them. So in response to them failing to complete the task, God did not go, oh, things have changed. Life is harder now. You've got political enemies now. Things have shifted and different people are in charge, so I'm going to let you slack. No. It doesn't matter who the earthly powers are. God was calling them to be faithful, and they should have been doing it regardless of that, regardless of social pressure. And in fact, I find it comforting and encouraging that in times of persecution, the church tends to grow, right? But here we do find they're slacking. Persecution initially often divides people up into the true followers and those that were kind of just going along with the crowd. And so sometimes there is an appropriate pruning along, but then sometimes there are people that are genuine, they're trying to follow, and they just get discouraged. We need to lift those people up and encourage them. Hey, yes, this is tough. Maybe you've never experienced pushback before, but it's going to happen. It's part of the job. It's part of the way things go. And the two prophets are going to be incredibly different. We're not going to read through Zechariah, but we are going to look at Haggai in just a minute. But Zechariah has lots of very interesting visions. And he's going to look forward to a future temple. There's this idea that they're disappointed in the temple that they're making because it's not as grand as when, David and Solomon had a big empire and they could devote a lot of resources to it. But he's going to point out that this is something important for the history of Israel and for the history of God's plan of salvation. They're not going to understand fully what that is, but they know that ultimately through that temple, all the nations of the world are going to be blessed. And God is even going to do something with these two people that are kind of in charge at this point. Ezra isn't on the scene yet. We have Joshua, or Yeshua, son of Jehozadak, and he's going to be there as the high priest. Well, there's a neat thing. He's got the same name as Jesus. And then there's Zerubbabel. Well, Zerubbabel has two different dads listed. Shealtiel is listed as his father here, but then we have a legal genealogy in Chronicles, and there's a different name listed. Zerubbabel was probably the product of a Levirate marriage. And so what do we see here? This is a guy who existed as a leader and as a governor because a vow was kept or a promise was kept and a special birth was had. Both of them together are pictures of Jesus, that Jesus was going to be God of salvation, Yeshua, the high priest, but he was also going to be the child of a vow who would come in and unite these two different roles and be the one true king. And so they're looking forward to this. But they don't quite understand all this yet. But God is still on the move on his path to provide salvation. But let's look at Haggai for a moment because it is an incredibly short book. And we can glean a few things from it before we leave today. In the second year of Darius the king, in the 6th month, and the first day of the month, came the word of Jehovah by Haggai the prophet unto Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, governor of Judah, and to Joshua, the son of Jehozadak, the high priest, saying, Thus speak Jehovah of hosts. We would typically hear Lord of hosts, saying, This people say, It is not the time for us to come, the time for Jehovah's house to be built. Then came the word of Jehovah by Haggai the prophet, saying, Is it time for you yourselves to dwell in your sealed houses while this house lies in waste? So whether it be social pressure, the government, or whatever, there was also something else going on. And I think it reveals part of why people respond the way that they do when there's pressure. Yeah, sure, the government was getting on to them, but also they were interested in their own houses. They were interested in their own homes. Rather than building up what God was doing and participating in his mission, being a part of something bigger than just putting a nice roof over your head, but actually something that could impact generations to come, they were focused on themselves. And so he's saying, is it right that this is happening? That you guys have nice houses while this isn't here for God? Now, therefore, thus says Jehovah of hosts, consider your ways. You have sown much and bring in little. You eat, but you have not enough. You drink, but you are not filled. In other translations, by the way, it says you're not filled with drink. Other translations say drunk. The idea is they're pursuing a good feeling, and yet they can't even get it. It doesn't bring them satisfaction. You clothe you, but there is none warm. And he that earneth wages to put it into a bag with holes. Jesus would use the illustration of building a castle on sand, right? No matter what they did, if they were trying to just make themselves happy and rich and all that stuff, they would find no real fulfillment. God would not protect them. God would not multiply the things that they had. And God would not even bless them with things that would last or work. Remember, God made their clothes in the desert last 40 years. He could make things stretch out in a supernatural way. But as they were pursuing themselves, he just let them go. And they found that everything that they tried was just falling apart because they were only pursuing themselves. He allowed that to happen so that they could come back and pursue him, because that's really what was better for them. And it's better for us. If you try to just please yourself, it's not going to work. Try to just take care of yourself, it's not going to work. You've got to follow God. And then these other things can be added unto you, but you can't let them be objects of worship or idols that take over your life. Thus says Jehovah of hosts, consider your ways. Go up to the mountain and bring wood and build the houses, and I will take pleasure in it, and I will be glorified, said Jehovah or Yahweh. You looked for much, and lo, it came to little, and when you brought it home, I did blow upon it. Why? Said Yahweh of hosts, because of my house that lies in waste. While you run every man to his own house. So he's admitting this is because of me. And by the way, Lord of hosts, that's commander of armies. So this whole thing, they're afraid of armies, and he's saying, I'm God of armies. That little army is nothing in comparison. Therefore, for your sake, the heavens withhold the dew, and the earth withhold its fruit. And I called for a drought upon the land, and upon the mountains, and upon the grain, and upon the new wine, and upon the oil, and upon that which the ground bringeth forth, and upon men, and upon cattle, and upon all the labor of the hands. We lose this in English, but a ruin in verses 4 and 9 is Harab, and a drought in verse 11 is Horeb. So he's saying, you left my place in ruin, so I gave you ruin. And it's kind of a play on words there. Their actions are directly responsible for God withholding blessings. So sometimes when we complain, America's fallen apart and, all this stuff, we like to blame everybody else. You know who's really to blame? If salt and light isn't being salt and light, we're to blame. And so we need to start here and focus on that. Then Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, and Joshua, the son of Jehozadak, the high priest, with all the remnant of the people, obeyed the voice of Jehovah their God and the words of Haggai the prophet as Jehovah their God had sent them. And the people did fear before Jehovah. Then spake Haggai, Jehovah's messenger, and Jehovah's message unto the people, saying, I am with you, said Jehovah. And Jehovah stirred up the spirit of Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, governor of Judah. In the 7th month, and 20th day of the month, came the word of Jehovah by Haggai, the prophet, saying, I apologize, my presenter is being a little slow. Speak now to Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, governor of Judah, and to Joshua, the son of Jehozadak, the high priest, and to the remnant of the people, saying, who is left among you that saw his house in its former glory? And how do you see it now? Is it not in your eyes as nothing? Yet now be strong, O Zerubbabel, saith Jehovah, and be strong, O Joshua, son of Jehozadak, the high priest, and be strong, all you people of the land, saith Jehovah, and work. For I am with you, saith Jehovah of hosts, according to the word that I covenanted with you when you came out of Egypt, and my spirit abode among you. Fear ye not. Some people don't do their job because it doesn't look glamorous. But if we all have a job in the kingdom, if we all have a ministry to do, it doesn't matter how glamorous it looks like. If we just stop because, imagine all the pastors with churches this size or smaller, I don't have a church that's 100 million people or whatever insane number, or 100,000 people, I'm just going to stop. Or I'm not going to do youth ministry because I don't have the technology I need. Or I'm not going to do, cleaning of the kids' ministry toys, because we have kind of cruddy toys. We all just stop. It's an excuse. Actually, there's something really important in doing things that are small. It all adds up. It may not be as glamorous. You may not get the pats on the back somebody else gets, but it is important and it's part of the plan. For thus says Jehovah of hosts, yet once it is a little while, and I will shake the heavens, and the earth, and the sea, and the dry land. And I will shake all the nations, and the precious things of all nations shall come. And I will fill this house with glory, says Jehovah of hosts. The silver is mine, and the gold is mine, saith Jehovah of hosts. The latter glory of this house shall be greater than the former, says Jehovah of hosts. And in this place I will give peace, says Jehovah of hosts. What they didn't understand is they were an important part of having that temple there that Herod the Great would eventually revitalize, and Jesus himself would walk into the one true source of peace. It was all part of the plan. What are we doing? Are we working for a pat on the back now? Or are we doing ministry because we love God and love our children and our children's children and want there to be a faithfulness here in California, here in Visalia? In the 24th day of the 9th month, in the 2nd year of Darius, come the word of Jehovah by Haggai the prophet, saying, thus says Jehovah of hosts, ask now the priest concerning the law, saying, if one bear holy flesh in the skirt of his garment, and with skirt do touch bread or pottage, or wine or oil or any food, shall it become holy? And the priest answered and said, no. Then said Haggai, if one that is unclean by reason of a dead body touch any of these, shall it be unclean? And the priest answered and said, it shall be unclean. Then answered Haggai and said, so is this people, and so is this nation before me, saith Jehovah. And so every work of their hands, that which they offer there, is unclean. So I've been giving you kind of a call to work, to do something. And I think a lot of people use Ezra as like, oh, we got a building project and it's awesome and all these things. But look at the context. The building wasn't as grand as it was before. It was a small piece of the puzzle. And they needed constant reminders about why they needed to do this. And even in that, there was a call to make sure they were doing it for the right reasons and with a pure heart. We can't allow God's work to be corrupted by our sins. We need to confess who we are, that should prepare us for communion in a few minutes, and our own failures, and lean into him and not bring our own sinful nature into the church in a way that would impact it. And now I pray you consider from this day and backward, before a stone was laid upon a stone in the temple of Jehovah, through all that time when one came to a heap of 20 measures, there were but 10. When one came to the wine vat to draw out 50 vessels, there were but 20. I smote you with blasting and with mildew and with hail in the work of your hands, yet you turned not to me, saith Jehovah. Consider, I pray you, from this day and backward, from the 4th and 20th day of the 9th month, since the day that the foundation of Jehovah's temple was laid, consider it. Is the seed yet in the barn? Yea, the vine and the fig tree and the pomegranate and the olive oil have not brought forth? From this day I will bless you. And the word of Jehovah came the second time unto Haggai in the 4th and 20th day of the month, saying, Speak to Zerubbabel, governor of Judah, saying, I will shake the heavens and the earth, and I will overthrow the throne of the kingdoms and will destroy the strength of the kingdoms of the nations. And I will overthrow the chariots and those that ride in them, and the horses and their riders shall come down, every one by the sword of his brother. And that day, saith Jehovah of hosts, I will take thee, O Zerubbabel, my servant, the son of Shealtiel, saith Jehovah, and I will make thee as a signet, for I have chosen thee, saith Jehovah of hosts. So he closes, and we're going to close with this. There's this reminder that God punished them when they were acting terribly. And God is really powerful, and they remember the power of his punishment. But hang on, he's chosen them. He's going to bless them as they are faithful and obey. And it's not over yet. If he can punish them like that, just think of what he's going to do to all the enemies that they have right now. They are to remain faithful despite what they are facing. And they are to take seriously the role that they have in God's kingdom, whether it be big or small. And so the application is easy. Are we doing that seriously enough?